Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Fireside Chat. My name is Michael Kummer, and today I have with me Dom D'Agostino. He is a metabolic researcher and scientist at the University of South Florida. And I think it's fair to say that you're an authority in the area of low-carb eating, ketogenic diet, metabolism, what happens in your body when you do keto or low-carb dieting. And so I'm super excited that I have you today for this chat. We're going to dive into a lot of topics around the ketogenic diet. Maybe going to start with a couple of basics to make sure we're all on the same page. And then I'd like to dive into some of the more performance-oriented issues with keto in terms of how beneficial keto is if you are maybe an athlete who does CrossFit or an endurance athlete or a weightlifter or some of those different types of exercises to see how beneficial or maybe not a ketogenic diet can be. And I'd also like to talk about maybe some of the misconceptions and assumptions people have when it comes to keto, as far as can you or should you do keto for the rest of your life? This is a long-term diet. This is an intervention diet that you should then move away from once you're maybe metabolically healthy. What does keto or ketosis in particular inside of your body? What does it to your brain? What does it to your longevity? And many, many other aspects that I'm sure you know a lot about. And so I'd like to dive into that. And then we'll, talk about maybe some of the resources where people can find out more about you, your products, your content, the papers you put out if people are interested in learning more. And we're going to wrap it up. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to you. Maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, Dom, and we'll dive right into it.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, Michael. Appreciate it. Yeah, to connect with your followers and wherever this, maybe wherever you're going to put this on social media or whatever. So I think as a scientific researcher, not every scientist thinks this, but I really do think, based upon the things that we're studying, we're observing with the ketogenic diet, it's important to get this information out there. So that's why I'm excited to always connect with people like you that get the information out there. Well, I started my education, I would say, going way back as an undergrad in nutrition science. And then I double majored nutrition and biology. And then that led me to getting more interested in physiology and understanding my own body. It probably motivated me to pursue a degree in physiology. I was very much into working out and weightlifting and just, doing everything I can through nutrition and physiology. But the program that I did my doctorate in was neuroscience and physiology. And I was also very interested in the brain because I figured, if I could figure out how my brain works, then I could understand the underlying basis of motivation, like why we eat. And I always knew intuitively that what we ate and the food we ate had a big impact on our brain function. But it was only like 10 years after I did my PhD, after I did my postdoctoral training, and I was in the middle of my assistant professorship, that I discovered that the ketogenic diet, which has been used as a clinically accepted standard of care for epilepsy. In the beginning, it was just like all epilepsy was treated with a ketogenic diet. Mayo Clinic and Johns Hopkins advanced this in 1920. Now it's used for drug refractory epilepsy because we have a whole toolbox of drugs. But I realized early on that nutrition was important, but I didn't understand how important it was until I realized that, and somehow this was not taught to me as an undergrad, that the ketogenic diet was used primarily as an anti-seizure approach. Right. And I started reading about that because the military was funding me to develop mitigation strategies for oxygen toxicity seizures, which limits Navy SEAL diving and special operations community sort of diving. And I was mostly focused on drugs, but I got excited that I could actually bring nutrition science back into my research. So we started studying the neuroprotective anti-seizure effects of ketogenic diet. And by the way, this is done at University of South Florida. Morsani College of Medicine is where, I'm a professor, and I teach, like this morning, I teach neuropharmacology, I teach neuroscience, physiology, a variety of different topics. But But as the research advanced, we started using ketogenic diets, ketone supplements, and other formulations, and saw that it was very neuroprotective under extreme environments where a Navy SEAL operator would be using a closed circuit rebreather, like a Draeger rebreather. So after we discovered that there's really profound anti-seizure effects, even more so than the drugs that we were studying, then we wanted to look at exercise performance and just performance overall and behavior. So we completed and published a few months ago a study basically showing that in a state of nutritional ketosis, and we achieved it with a ketone ester and different ketone formulations, but we had done prior work with the ketogenic diet that actually enhanced performance in our Alzheimer's disease mice. So we studied behavior and we studied exercise in a variety of different experimental models. And what we observed, we have never observed a deficit in exercise. We're not, the rats and models are not, they're not lifting weights, but they're running. We actually have them sprinting. It's like a Rotarod device where they have to sprint, and also endurance. And although we did publish a study with our Italian colleagues on elite level gymnasts, and basically found that strength was maintained, but we had favorable body composition alterations with a ketogenic diet, high protein ketogenic diet relative to the standard diet. So I do clinical research too, and we have some clinical studies that we're doing. We're also doing some stuff with the military, basically showing that, most importantly, from a neuroscientist perspective, that being in a state of ketosis makes you very resilient physiologically, especially from a neuroscience perspective. So your cognitive resilience, you're less likely to have a seizure. You can, logistically, it works out because you don't get hungry after your body is adapted to ketones. So there's a lot of benefits there. Also, a ketogenic diet has a higher energy density, so it's less weight you need to carry with you if you're on military operations and things like that. And it may sound like a small thing, but from the perspective of a military operator, the weight of food is a very big deal. You know? So these become really important things to kind of focus on. So our studies show that we have very profound neurophysiological resilience, and we find that from the perspective of endurance training, animals tend to go a little bit longer. Like I said, we don't have them lifting weights or anything, but we actually do have studies in the context of muscle wasting. So we study muscle wasting from Alzheimer's, or not, from ALS mice, and also mostly focused on something called cancer cachexia. So when we have cancer, we tend to release a lot of inflammatory factors that can break the muscle. And my previous student, Dr. Andrew Kutnick, now, he focused on basically developing an anti-catabolic metabolic therapy that could prevent muscle wasting. So what we found is that ketones are not anabolic, but in the context of muscle wasting, they become very catabolic, or very anti-catabolic. So they prevent muscle wasting, and we did the molecular, studies to show how it's doing that through a variety of different pathways. So so we've really sort of kind of set the stage in advancing the use of ketogenic diets outside of the typical standard of care, which was epilepsy, and we're applying it to a wide range of neurological diseases, different metabolic diseases, cancer, and now we're looking at enhancing in human subjects. We have a clinical trial that's registered right now, where the subjects are healthy. They don't have diabetes. They're not, morbidly obese or anything, but we put them on a low carb, a modified, what I would call a modified ketogenic diet, a little bit higher in the protein. And then we're looking at many different metabolic biomarkers. We have continuous glucose monitors on them as well. We're looking at cytokines, chemokines, insulin. We're measuring insulin. We're looking at psychological measures. So we're looking at mental health. We're looking at anxiety. We're looking at depression. We're looking at non-alcoholic fatty liver disease on top of that. And we do find that using a continuous glucose monitor, that particular subset of people have a reversal of their non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And what's kind of very interesting is that they do not have diabetes. They were perfectly healthy, their blood work, but when we scanned their livers, they actually had fatty liver, and like all of them did,
Right.
like borderline, that the technical term is hepatic steatosis.
Mhm.
So we're doing that now. We just finished the second cohort, and now our statistician is analyzing the data. And then, I could talk about some of the stuff that we're doing with the military, Office of Navy Research, NAVSEA, DARPA, NASA. We do like a variety of different projects looking at extreme environments, and we do a lot of
Mhm.
stress biology, like measuring cortisol and things like that under different load conditions. And we think that that's where ketogenic therapies in the form of a diet or supplement may be advantageous for military personnel or astronauts in these extreme environments.
Okay. So speaking of, because you just brought it up, is a ketogenic diet a stressor for the body, or does it reduce stress,
Yeah,
generally speaking?
I never been like asked that question before, but it's a good one, because if you're on like a normal diet, right, a high carbohydrate diet, and you radically shift to a ketogenic diet, your brain kind of goes through glucose withdrawal, and that's
Mhm.
stress. And actually what happens is your cortisol gets elevated initially, and then after 2 or 3 weeks it comes back down probably. And a couple other things happen. I mean, some people get like the keto flu, they get brain fog,
Right.
they get a headache and things like that. So that's something that also happens as your brain transitions to, it's not like it's using glucose and then using ketones. It's, that there's very powerful homeostatic mechanisms that maintain our blood glucose. So, it might be a tad higher, 4 or 5 millimolar, in milligrams per deciliter, like, 90 or something on a carbohydrate based diet. It may come down to like 80 or 75 on a diet. But, the brain is sensing that there's less glucose available, and then it starts there's actually an increase in reactive oxygen species because the mitochondria have to work harder. So it takes a while for your physiology to adapt to that. But once you adapt to using fat for energy and ketones for energy as a brain fuel, then that can help to stabilize. Well, we know for sure that it stabilizes our neural circuitry. That's why it works for efficacy, and it balances some of the transmitters. Glutamate to GABA is like in a ratio that is favorable when you're on a ketogenic diet. So it works in that context. So there is an initial stressor, just like there would be an initial stressor to if you didn't exercise. If you start exercising, your mitochondria have to work harder because you have to generate energy through additional energy. And the same thing kind of happens with a ketogenic diet, is that we have to generate more ATP through increasing a different metabolic pathway. And then then the adaptations that are associated with that for athletes tend to happen a little bit faster, but for the majority of people, it's going to take a couple weeks to a couple months to really feel normal following this diet. And I'm referencing like the clinical community because, I work with various clinics that have been using this for decades on patients. So a lot of what I know is actually just from the clinical data of having patients on a ketogenic diet, a very strict, where everything is weighed out for over 30 years. Like they're working with people, glucose transporter type 1 deficiency syndrome, or different types of epilepsy, like Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, and a variety of different seizure disorders. They have literally been, that have been every single day of their life for more than 30 years on a keto diet, and their blood work looks great, and they're doing great. I mean, and a lot of kids that have epilepsy who manage it with the ketogenic diet can wean off of it, and then actually the epilepsy never comes back. So that was the case for Charlie Abrams, the son of the Jim Abrams, a Hollywood producer. So we had a conference, the Metabolic Health Summit, which was in Santa Barbara, and the Charlie Foundation was a big sponsor. And actually, we do a big fundraising event for them. And Jim was there. He's made a lot of movies like Naked Gun or Airplane and things like that. So and occasionally, Charlie's doing really well. He's teaching, he's playing music, and he's a very interesting story. The biggest side effect that they talk about with kids in the ketogenic diet is that it can stunt your growth, because by lowering protein, it lowers IGF-1 and growth hormone. Charlie was on the diet and he's like 6'4", so he towered over his parents. So, obviously it didn't affect him, but now we know that a ketogenic diet, and this kind of parlays into the exercise world, it does not have to be as low as protein as we once thought it does. So
right, and that's a good point, because many people think that increasing your protein intake is going to kick you out of ketosis, right? Because you suddenly have more glucose, but there's a process in the body, I think it's called gluconeogenesis, that the body uses to convert non-carbohydrate sources into glucose, right? It could be amino acids from the protein that you eat. But that's very much a demand-driven process, I understand, and not necessarily a supply-driven process. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's still under investigation, but yeah, a couple things are put into motion when you go on a low-carb diet. So there's gluconeogenesis. Your insulin gets lower, but glucagon tends to get higher, and for athletes, could be more of a demand for athletes. What has been observed and published is that an athlete on a very low carb diet has a persistently elevated level of glucagon, and that glucagon elevation would make it possible for them to make more glucose, in the absence of carbohydrates. So that could be an option there. Although in our study, we did not see that. And I think in the general population, you kind of, you don't see that much. I know with me, I mean, I don't train. I do work outside and stuff, but I might lift weights, not even an hour per week, like total time. So restricting carbohydrates for me does not really affect my performance. If I was to, try to gain muscle, I would probably start working out more and may actually add some carbohydrates to where I'm getting like 100 grams a day. But right now, I mean, if I increase my volume, and I think for a majority of athletes that the ketogenic diet may not be ideal, especially strength athletes or CrossFit athletes. Whereas people like Zach Bitter, endurance athletes, like the more they adapt their body to utilizing fat and ketones for energy, then the better performance that they have, sustained performance for like ultra endurance events. And, I talked to quite a few people who have made that transition, and it's something that you want to do in the off season, not something prior to like an event. And most, experienced athletes know this, to not radically change something coming up to an event. So, but if they give themselves like a half a year lead time, and I really do emphasize half a year, then that's sufficient amount of time to, produce these adaptations that could be favorable for endurance events.
Right. So, just a personal anecdote, I do CrossFit predominantly, and I've been wearing on and off continuous glucose monitors as well. And I see typically with every CrossFit workout, which, very often ends up me being on the floor and being completely wasted, I see huge spikes in glucose, like up to 200 milligrams per deciliter. Yep. And so, and while I was on keto, I was on a fairly low, like 10 net grams of carbs a day and working out 5-6 times a week. And I've noticed that, or I felt at least like as if just relying on gluconeogenesis to replenish my glycogen stores before the next hit comes wasn't as efficient as I would have hoped.
Yeah.
And so after about, I don't know, a couple of years, I reintroduced more carbs, and by more carbs, I mean, as you said, maybe 100, grams a day, on a bad quote unquote day, it's maybe 150. But I feel overall during my workouts better. I seem to recover quicker, especially, post-workout, the next 2 hours after I work out. I'm not like, somewhere in the corner, trying to recover. I can, go move on basically and do my next thing. I feel like I have still energy left. And the other thing I would like to, and maybe I would like to have your take on this, and what you think, if that is a beneficial move to introduce more carbs, or if I just, suck it up and because it has longevity, maybe benefits that might not be performance enhancing, but from a longevity, insulin sensitivity perspective, etc., that might be actually good, But also then in addition to that, I've also been experimenting with dual fueling, basically having some carbs, but also using exogenous ketones for workouts to experiment how that works. And so I would like to hear your take on that as well, if you have experimented with that or any experience with that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that approach. I think from the context of the way you train, I think dual fuels would be ideal. I am of the opinion from the longevity perspective to always keep the body hungry, even if you're going for like maximum performance and everything, to add carbohydrates, but at the level of where you're not spilling over. So meaning that, you stay within a tight glycemic variability range. You monitor occasionally your fasting insulin to make sure you're sort of within a good range. Once we start, excess carbohydrates are really like the problem, right? As far as like longevity, and that would show up on a continuous glucose monitor as postprandial response, and then insulin levels start to creep up over time. So actually, I noticed that adding even I went a couple of weeks just adding 100 grams of carbs to even like 120, and then my insulin was the same or even slightly lower. So it was kind of interesting. And then you added that, and then after an overnight fast, I think by adding a little bit of carbohydrates back in, I may have increased my insulin sensitivity because my body was still kind of hungry for carbs, right? So I was adding enough in, but I was still kind of, the body was still kind of hungry and them. So yeah, I encourage people to sort of, depending upon what their goals are, what their sport is, and how they feel, continuous glucose monitor can be very useful to experiment. And the same applies to like adding exogenous ketones to like a pre-workout drink. So I like to add carnitine, exogenous ketones in the form of Keto Start is what I use, and then creatine monohydrate to that, and maybe a little bit like a quarter or half pack of Element, although the Keto Start has the same electrolyte formulations as Element, but I kind of like the taste of Element, makes it a little bit salty. So that's usually my pre-workout go-to. So I'm getting no glucose, but I'm getting some creatine, and I'm getting, so this would be the keto low carb. But if you want to, in the CrossFit, you might want to add some just, generic glucose polymers if you want a little bit slower releasing, like dextrose, something like that, and add that in 20, even a little bit of carbs, like 20 to 30 grams of carbs throughout like an hour, 2-hour workout. It's going to make a difference.
Right.
Yep. Okay. And then, if you just introduce those carbs in and around your workout, and then go back to eating low carb, you could be back into ketosis in a short amount of time, especially if, you're in an energy deficit, and when you are in an energy deficit and say you're trying to make weight or just trying to lose body fat or something like that, you really do feel those extra carbs, and you feel the extra ketones too. Right. So that's why, a little bit of carbs, a little bit of ketones, and some creatine and sodium electrolytes. That's like the perfect formula. It's simple. It's nothing, ketones are the newer supplement out there, and, more research needs to be on these things, but in our hands, they're pretty efficacious for a variety of different things. So they've been part of the mix that I've been using.
Yeah. Now, speaking of staying in ketosis or going back into ketosis, last year I did the Murph challenge, which is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that CrossFit type of workout, but it's It's a 20-pound. You wear a 20-pound vest. You do a mile run, 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 air squats, another mile run. And I did this at the conclusion of a 2-day fast. And right after, I think I had 3 bananas and I don't know how many tablespoons of honey. And throughout the rest of the day, I remained in deep ketosis. So my body must have soaked up, those carbs,
Yeah,
and insulin went, right down. And I was still in ketosis, the very same evening. So I wouldn't have expected
yeah,
that, but it was interesting to see. Um,
yeah.
so, if you remain in ketosis for an extended period, let's say you mentioned, some of those patients do it for 30 years.
Yeah.
Are there any potential negative side effects? And if so, are they for specific populations, or are there any ones that are generic and could potentially affect anyone? And I'm asking this in the context of, I felt like whenever I fast for 24 hours or longer, whenever I'm in ketosis for longer, I feel like my sleep is different. I dream more vividly, which might be because of the ketones and how they impact the brain. But I also feel like I wake up more often, and I sleep lighter, even though all of the devices I have to measure my sleep, as good as they are, or as reliable as they are, my deep and REM sleep don't seem to be negatively impacted much. But at least I have the perception that when I wake up in the middle of the night, I'm like, I haven't slept yet, even though I have. But it's something feels different. And one time I heard maybe it's maybe cortisol. If you run out of glucose during the night, which if you've been on keto for a while, your glucose level should be fairly stable, I would assume. Then maybe your cortisol goes up, and that's when you wake up and suddenly feel not tired anymore. You're ready to roll, even though it's only 2 a.m. Have you had any experience with that or any take on that?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. Well, I have all my carbohydrates at the end of the day, actually the last couple of hours before I sleep. So, my biggest meal is probably the dinner, and that's like salad, maybe like stir-fried vegetables, things like that. And then I snack on some fruit and things like that at nighttime. And then so it's like I am getting like 50 to even 100 grams of carbs like after
Right.
6, starting at 6. So, but then I'm, like right now I'm in ketosis, it's late afternoon. So when I remove the carbohydrates from later in the day, I noticed that same effect, like my body was sort of craving the carbohydrates, and then my glucose meter was going off in the middle of the night when I removed the fruit. So basically, I got really busy and I didn't get to go to the store. And we have fruit trees on our property, but they weren't blooming. So I out of carbohydrates. So I went like 2 weeks without it. And during that time, my CGM was going off in early, like around 3 a.m. or something like that. And I was waking up a little bit early, and I did take some measurements, and my cortisol was a little bit higher of that. So I think, maybe if I let my body adapt and had zero carbohydrate and went back to that diet again, I would adapt over time. But my body was basically detecting, even though I was on a ketogenic diet for most of the time, pretty much, I guess, I would kick out of ketosis at nighttime. Although my ketones would still be, low levels at nighttime. I do think that the elevation of cortisol, which is a natural response, they call it the dawn effect, was greater after I had abruptly removed that nightly carb feeding. When I woke up, I almost felt like more of a sense of panic when I woke up. Like in the morning, you'd wake up and like the things of the day just go rushing into your head. It's almost like a little bit more anxiety when I woke up.
Yep. Exactly.
I felt a little bit more anxious when I woke up when I didn't have those carbs at nighttime. But yeah, I sleep really well. This morning I had to wake up early. I was teaching very early today at the university, and I had set my alarm for like 5 something. I usually like to sleep till about 7, sometimes 7 on weekends. And I went back to eating breakfast. Again, some days I don't, especially if I lecture, but on other days, if I do intermittent fasting too often, I just cannot keep my weight up. I mean, it's a super great weight loss tool. And And it's also good if I do have something that I have to put a lot of mental energy and focus in, then I will wake up, I always drink a big glass of water first thing I wake up, take, some of my supplements, some I take with food. And then I will go outside, let the dogs out, walk around barefoot, if the sun's coming up, I try to get that early morning sun into my eyes and everything. And that resets things. And then I get to my workstation, like a standing desk. And then I try to crank out a good 2 or 3 hours of work. I try to get that done. And if I don't eat, I have the best focus. But if I do eat, like this morning, I just had some eggs and then some shrimp or some fish or something like that. And other days, if I'm trying to gain weight, I'll have some ground beef. I'll have some liver, things like that. And my dogs eat the very same. So when I make my meal, I make it, and I have 3 plates basically, and we all eat the same thing. So my wife is different. So, but the dogs eat exactly what I eat every morning. So whatever I'm eating, I make it for 3 of us. So.
That's nice. Our dog has its own raw, typically beaver right now. We feed him ground beaver, just an entire beaver, just ground up, so with the bones and everything. And that's what he really likes right now.
Where do you get beaver from? Do you trap them, or do you get them?
No, I wish, but there is a we are in Georgia, but up in Tennessee, there is a company that sells pet foods, raw pet food, basically. And they have rabbits and beaver and beef, obviously, and chicken, and all kinds of different ones. And he really likes beaver.
So we have wild hogs, and my wife was on a horse, and she had a wild hog chasing her. So I grabbed the gun and I shot him, and then he was like 200 some pounds. I had to pick him up with the tractor, and then we grew up deer hunting. So skinned them, and then for a couple of weeks, almost a month, I got 2 of them actually. We were, me and my Chilla was eating them, my wife was eating, but the dogs were like in heaven. I mean, we were just eating.
I can imagine.
Yeah, we have a lot of animals on our property and stuff. Even squirrels. Like I'll eat squirrels. I'll cook them in the crock pot with.
Plenty of them for sure. Yeah, plenty of them and easy to catch, I guess, in comparison. Cool. So I guess just to summarize what we've talked about for now. So ketogenic diet, long term, not a problem. There are people who've been doing it for 30 years and they're completely fine. In terms of exercise, physical activity, it depends a little bit on what your type of exercise is. Maybe if you want to go to the CrossFit Games, a strict ketogenic diet might not be the best approach. Maybe you will need some carbs, but if you're an endurance athlete, maybe marathon and stuff, there have been many examples of athletes who have been thriving on a ketogenic diet. I've read about that before, and I can see, obviously you have everyone has a lot of fat on their body, right? So if you just continuously want to burn fuel, even if you don't eat anything, there is fuel on your body that you can burn during those longer races, right?
Absolutely.
In terms of, I've read and heard that keto ruins the thyroid. Is there anything to that? Anything that you've seen during your research? Is there any risk of ruining any hormones or hormone balances by doing keto?
No, this is reported more often in women that do it. And a lot of times when they start the ketogenic diet, they're also starting a diet in general. So they're they do intermittent fasting, caloric restriction, and over exercising, and then their thyroid's low. I typically haven't seen any. I get a lot of emails, and I would say 99% of them are women kind of complaining about it. I would say women's physiology are more sensitive to dietary changes like this. They could have amenorrhea with a ketogenic diet. So yeah, there are a couple side effects I would like to just kind of quickly cover. If you've had kidney stones, at least in the medical literature, if you're on a medical ketogenic diet, that you could be more likely to get kidney stones. But that's also if you take enough minerals, potassium, magnesium, that can offset that. And if you drink enough, it's a non-issue. That and carnitine supplementation is super important. Obviously, you're going to get that in like beef, but in kids that follow a ketogenic diet, we always see that their carnitine levels are low. what's that indicative of is actually their body is burning so much fat that carnitine is like a shuttle that pulls the fat into the mitochondria for it to be burned. And you're burning so much fat. It's just evidence that you're burning so much fat. So, but if you add carnitine back in, some people actually, it boosts their energy levels, and their energy is higher because it's actually further increasing fat oxidation. So I would recommend magnesium, extra potassium, sodium too, carnitine, and yeah, these are the things that I take. You know, I eat a ton of fish, but if you don't eat fish, omega-3 fatty acids are pretty good. MCTs and MCT oils are a type of fat that would further elevate your ketone levels, and they could be very useful. We use them in our engineered ketogenic diets that we use in the lab. We use MCTs often. Oh yeah, and when it comes back to females, you know, they may what has been, you know, helpful is a gradual transition. So if they're on like 200 carbs a day, do like 2 weeks of like 150 and then drop down to 100. You know, I've worked with a lot of clinicians that guide a lot of people with the ketogenic diet, and they're very adamant that you got to ease them into it for better compliance. And the feedback that I'm getting when you're doing blood work like every week or every 2 weeks is that for females in particular, a transition works better for them, you know, to adjust to the diet. And I think with hormones and things like that. So that would be my recommendation, to gradually like tighten the carbs down, and not to just go like 300 grams of carbs and then, hey, Monday I'm starting a ketogenic diet, 0 carbs. You know, that's you know, you are forcing your body to adapt faster, and then, you know, that could improve metabolic flexibility, but it's going to be a lot of stress. So you want to do it at but my recommendation is to just do it a little bit more gradually if you don't want to alter hormone, because you can get rebound effects, you know, when you're, you know, with cortisol, with things like that. I'm also speaking from my perspective where, you know, when I was really into weightlifting and stuff, I was tinkering with these diets all the time, going like really protein, low carb, very high carb. So it's like you kind of build like a metabolic memory. You know what it feels like to be low carbs, you know what it feels like to be in a caloric deficit. And, you know, it's like, and then when I started researching the ketogenic diet, I actually got the medical books and I formulated it and weighed everything out. And it's like, okay, yeah, I remember feeling like this again. And it's like your body's running off a different fuel source. And then, my strength in the, not so much in like deadlift and squat, but like my pressing exercises, like I just didn't have that, like that oomph, you know, like on bench, like that strength went down. But as I adjusted my protein and my calories, it gradually like started to come back up, you know. So your strength may take a hit in the beginning, but it's like your body adapting. So it's kind of, and then after you adjust the calories to make sure you're getting enough calories, then you start to get that fullness back. But the first couple of weeks, you like flatten out, like your glycogen dumps from your muscles, and it's just like your body's working hard, you're burning a lot of fat, and then gradually you adapt to it and you start feeling better. Yeah.
Is there a difference in terms of benefits, whether you are in a mild state of ketosis? Let's say, you know, if you do like, you know, test your blood work, let's say 0.5 mmol per liter versus 3 mmol per liter, or if you use a breath ketone analyzer, if you're at 5 ACEs or at 15, are there different benefits? Should I go for deep ketosis all the time, or do you adjust at some point and the body is just using the energy and you will never get back to that deep ketosis that you might have had in the beginning?
Yeah, ketogenic journey. Yeah, it's a good question. If your goal is to lose fat, and if your goal is to like lose weight, especially lose fat, then getting above 1 millimolar, getting above like 10 ACEs is going to be beneficial. And that's in the area of what I call a therapeutic ketogenic diet, because when your ketones start to get elevated at that level, then we can actually point to the scientific literature and say, hey, that's when you're getting the anti-seizure effects, that's when you're getting neuroprotective effects. So there may be, you know, in addition to burning more fat, you may be getting a lot of extra benefits from the ketones themselves when you're in that state. But when it comes to a lifestyle diet, you can get a lot of benefits by just staying 0.5 millimolar, to 1 millimolar. But once you get above that, then you're entering the world of like therapeutic ketosis, where you're really operating in a different sort of physiological level. And I say that because 99.9% of the population never achieves that. So it's like, you never get to that if you just eat any kind of normal diet or what's considered normal, right? So you really are walking around in a very, very different physiological state than part of the population. So I think that needs to be appreciated. But like for the athletes tend to use ketones pretty quickly for fuel. And even I don't really consider myself an athlete per se, but like when my ketones are elevated and I go for a walk or I start exercising, they come back down pretty quick. And that's your body using them as a source of energy. I think I actually feel best between 0.5 and like 1 or 1.5. That's when I feel, subjectively, if I'm gonna, and that's actually maintaining that mild state of ketosis has really improved all my markers of metabolic health. We can talk about LDL. My LDL tends to be elevated from a clinical perspective, but there's a paper out that just came out recently by Nick Norwitz and David Feldman and David Ludwig from Harvard is on it too, on the lean mass hyperresponders. So athletes who are very low carb that have persistently elevated LDL, like 2 or 3 times higher, where like the normal doctor would look at that and like freak out, immediately prescribe a statin and think that you're going to be on the operating table anytime.
Right.
But what they don't, all the other biomarkers, like, the blood glucose, the inflammation's low, triglycerides are low, LDL's looking great, but they look at that, or the HDL, but they look at that LDL and they panic and they think that this is going to cause a heart attack. So there's a lot of debate in this field. There's a paper that was literally just published like 2 or 3 days ago on lean mass hyperresponders. And in the beginning, I thought it was an anomaly, but I think you're going to see a lot of these people in the CrossFit community, like, they're eating keto, they're eating low carb, all their biomarkers are great, even blood pressure is great, but their LDL skyrockets. And there's emerging science to say that you don't need to be concerned about that if the other biomarkers are looking. But it's the question that I get asked more about than anything else. So that's why I'm mentioning it here.
And that's a good point, because I've fallen into that category. I mean, my LDL is typically somewhere between 150 and inching up to 200. But my CRP is below 0.3. My fasting insulin is below 2. It's 1.8. What is it, nanogram? Or I don't know what the unit is, but below the low cutoff, basically. My LDL is high. My triglycerides are lower than the LDL. And when I talk to, I've stopped going to regular doctors a long time ago, but last time I went, and he's like, it's way too high. We need to do something. And I'm like, look at me, do it. And then I had a calcium score scan and a particle test just to make sure, and all of them came back, perfectly fine. 0 calcium deposits, nothing. So I'm like, there is no plaque. That LDL does not do any harm to me, evidently. And based on my lifestyle, I don't see, what's wrong with that. And
what were your triglyceride levels? They were low.
I think they're like 37, 38 or so. HDL at 50. So, it was the LDL and my total cholesterol was high because, my body was using a lot of, fat for energy. So it was shuttling a lot of cholesterol, I suppose. Yeah. And that's what LDL does, right?
My LDL is like also about 170. And then my HDL was like 70, 75, something like that. But my triglycerides are like 42. So very, very similar numbers. I had that. And my LP(a) was even, I did an NMR profile measurement too, and some of those things. But I fit into the pattern A, which is just because my HDL is so good and my LDL is so good, and my HSCRP was like non-detectable or 0.1 after the last work panels that I got. So that's very good. They only say
below 0.3 because they cannot detect whatever the level is. It's so low that it's undetectable, basically. So.
Yep. HSCRP. Yeah. So that's so I would say in that context, the biggest question I get from people, athletes that follow this, is that they are very concerned by what their doctors are telling them, that they need to go on statin. And I can tell you, like the athletes that you consult with and everything, if they're to go on a statin, they're going to get a lot more muscle pain. They're going to get decrements in performance with like a normal dose of a statin. Then again, you know, if you have hypercholesterolemia and like a family history of heart disease, and it's like your LDL is super skyrocketed, I have friends that do like a half of a statin tablet, and they take it like on a Monday and a Thursday, and it just still high, but it brings it back down to like high normal. And they say, you know, they don't get any, and they're just doing it sort of like insurance wise, you know. But there's an emerging hypothesis that LDL is functioning to transport the triglyceride to the muscle, where there's much higher levels of fatty acid oxidation. So, you know, the LDL is not cholesterol. It's a lipoprotein that carries not only cholesterol, but triglycerides. It carries phospholipids, especially if you damage your muscle. There's going to be a need to transport a lot more fat, but a lot more phospholipids to repair the membranes and things like that. And you need to have a fat transport system and a phospholipid transport system to repair muscle, which is constant turnover. If you're, you know, hitting these hard workouts and like that, the turnovers is going to be much, much higher in a fat adapted person. So you're going to need your transport capacity. And that I think that reflects the higher numbers to some extent.
That makes sense. Yeah. All right, cool. I know we're getting close to your next lecture here, so I think we're gonna wrap it up. Again, very much appreciate your time. It was a lot of very good information. I'm gonna put as much as I can into the description. It's gonna go live on YouTube, and then I'm gonna promote it on social media, of course, as well. But I'm gonna include links. You mentioned the KetoStart exogenous ketone that you use, right? I'm gonna put the link down below. Is there any other? Where can people find you if they have questions? Is there a page, a social media account that you would people like to know about?
Yeah, they could find me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Just like Google my name, you know, and then ketonutrition.org is the website. Keto Nutrition, all word, ORG. And Audacious Nutrition KetoStart is the brand that I use. In my coffee, I like to use Keto Brains. It's like the supplement, and Keto Brick. A lot of people ask me about keto bars and things like that. Keto Brick, you know, I'm not sponsored by them in any way. I just love their product. I just ate one, you know, now. That, and then the Metabolic Health Summit too is a conference that we just hosted that I help promote, and we like to bring attention to all these things that we're talking about, not just epilepsy, but we have talked about athletic performance. We talked about Tommy Wood gave a great talk about building muscle on a ketogenic diet, and Colin Champ talked about the importance of muscle and cancer therapy and things like that. So Metabolic Health Summit, Keto Nutrition, and then our company is Ketone Technologies. And, you know, we work with government organizations and industry to do research on that. So.
Right. Okay, cool. I'm going to link that all down below so people can find it. And with that, we're going to wrap it up again. Thanks so much. Very much appreciate it. It was a great talk, a lot of information. I hope everyone can benefit from that, and, you know, start if they have not yet on it, a ketogenic journey, and see how they feel. You know, I can definitely tell if I'm in ketosis, my brain works differently. You know, it works better, you know,
for sure.
It's like rocket fuel. And so, yeah, with that, we're going to wrap it up. Thanks so much, Tom.
Thanks for the interview, Michael. Appreciate it.